Welcome to the Power Lunch live on LinkedIn. I'm Rhett Power, your host. We're back for a second show today, which is unique, but we couldn't pass up the opportunity to talk to our guest this afternoon. Now, the point of the show is to learn from the very best. We have the top CEOs, best-selling authors, thought leaders in their fields. And again, the point is for us to get better at what we do. And so that's why we do the show. Now, the fun part about that is it can be interactive, and you can actually talk to our guest if you ask your questions. That means you got to get on the keyboard and engage with us here on social media, on LinkedIn or any of the other platforms. If we don't get to the answers on the show, we will get to them afterwards, no doubt about it. So please do ask your questions so that you can find out what you want to know from our guest. Now, another thing that's unique about the show is that it's simulcast on Twitter, Facebook, of course, LinkedIn, YouTube, all with the help of Social Live. And so there we go. That's sort of the basics of the show. If you like or love it, give it a like or share on social so that your network can benefit from these conversations. This afternoon, we have got Liz Forkin Bohannon on the program. She's a speaker. She's an entrepreneur, founder of Sseko Designs, a socially conscious fashion brand that creates educational and economic opportunities for women across the world. We're going to talk about that a little bit. She's been named by John Maxwell as one of the top 3 transformational leaders in the U.S. She's a Shark Tank alum, right?
Yeah.
Yep, Shark Tank alum. Been on Good Morning America, Vogue, been across all kinds of media. She's got a new book out, which we're going to talk a lot about today, Beginner's Pluck, Build Your Life's Purpose and Impact Now. As it's a bestseller, right? Is it bestseller?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we hit some lists. Yeah.
Congrats. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And you've had this sort of interesting journey. We were talking before we got on, and we've both done some work in Uganda, but what led you to this sort of path of creating Sseko Designs and how you did it, the sort of the purpose behind it? What led you on that journey to do that?
Yeah, so I grew up in Missouri and went to the University of Missouri, where I attended journalism school. Mm-hmm. And throughout my time in university, I became increasingly interested in issues that were facing women and girls living in extreme poverty and in conflict and post-conflict zones. So I graduate from college and I'm like, I go out and I look for my dream job, some journalistic institution that's going to send me all over the world to write and report on these issues. And that didn't happen. So I ended up taking a job at a corporate communications firm. And just a few months into that job, I kind of had this moment where I realized that I said I really cared about women and girls living in extreme poverty and in conflict and post-conflict zones. And yet when I looked at my life and kind of the trajectory that I was on, there was no overlap. No overlap. My actual life, my day-to-day, my relationships, my friendships, my community, all of it was entirely unaffected by the realities that face billions of girls across the globe. And so I kind of just had this come to Jesus moment, honestly, where I was like, okay, I can either just kind of stop running my mouth about this thing that I'm passionate about and chalk it up to I was an idealistic college student, and go on and make money and climb the corporate ladder and buy the house and have the kids and the whole deal. Or I could actually close that gap between what I say I care about and my actual life. And so I decided to do the latter. So I quit that corporate job and I bought a one-way plane ticket to Uganda. And I showed up without a job, without a plan. Literally, my whole goal was just build community, make relationships, kind of close that gap between my intellectual beliefs and the actual life that I was living.
Let me ask you something real quick, because I remember I used to work for Clear Channel Communications, and I remember the day I told my boss, I was managing a radio station. I remember telling him, I'm quitting. I'm going into Peace Corps. I remember the look on his face. It was priceless. What was the look on your boss's face when you said, I gotta quit? I'm going.
Similar, yeah. Similarly, we were on the cusp of the Great Recession. And so it was like, there was a lot of good reason for the older people in my life to tell me that this idea was absolutely crazy. Like here, I was a college grad. I actually had a job during a time where like a lot of graduates were struggling to even find employment. He did, when I said I was going to Uganda, I do remember him being like, oh, well, we have an office in South Africa. Maybe kind of like, that's kind of close, right? I've actually never told that story before because I don't think anybody's ever asked that question. But yeah, my bosses, my parents, basically anybody who took a vested interest in my life was questioning my discernment skills at that moment in time. But once you have kind of a realization, they don't happen that much in life. But once you kind of have the moment where you're like, oh, I can't actually ever unthink that thought. Like I thought it, and I either need to ignore it or I need to let it kind of change the course of things. And to be honest, I didn't know at the time. I really had no idea that a decade later, I'd be sitting here telling you about my vertically integrated manufacturing company in a landlocked country in East Africa. To me at the time, it was literally like, hey, I want to have integrity and I want my life I want to live out the things that I actually say that I care about. And I didn't know, was that going to be, several months? Was that going to be years? What was because I didn't really go with an agenda. My only agenda was just like build relationships and kind of be in community and take this risk and answer this little kind of nagging question of like, yeah, but what if you actually just went? Like, what if you stopped talking about it and actually just showed up?
When you land in Entebbe, no job, no idea what's next. What happened?
Yeah, so Entebbe, I landed par for the course at about 11:30 p.m. No, it was probably, my flight lands at 11, so you don't get out. You're not out until like 1 a.m. So it turns out the one person I knew in the entire country who had agreed to come pick me up at the airport, the guy that she was with ended up getting sick. Long story short, they were like 3 hours late. They didn't show up for like hours. So I am like, I don't have a cell phone. I don't have a phone number. I have no idea where I'm going. I'm just hanging out literally in the middle of the night at Entebbe airport telling every cab driver of like, no, I'm fine. I'm just waiting for my ride. I'm good. Inside, of course, being like, I'm not good. I'm not good at all. I have no idea what's about to happen. And so that kind of just like ushered me into honestly a season of life of me wandering around in my head going, I'm not good. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not good. And so for several months, I really just like kind of wandered around asking questions, making friends, trying to build community. And through that process, I ended up meeting an incredible group of young women at a girls' leadership academy. Okay. And these young women are a part of an academic program that's basically like a 2-year college prep program. So this incredible school, their mission is basically like, hey, we want to go find the best and the brightest female scholars in the country who come from backgrounds of extreme poverty, who no way they could afford a school of this academic caliber, and definitely they won't be continuing on to university, not because of skill or ability, but just because of sheer finances.
Right.
So they had this amazing 2-year program. And long story short, I got really involved with this school, and just through kind of being out at the school, basically became familiarized with a really big challenge that this school was facing. And that was that in Uganda, there's a 9-month gap between high school and university that's intended to allow those female graduates, or all graduates, to find a job to make money to pay for college. Well, with this specific population of young women, what happened during that 9-month gap is that they're going back home to their villages because it's a boarding school. And they're testing into college. They're literally top 5% of students in the country. And they're going back home to their villages with all of this like gusto and vision and excitement. I'm going to go to university and here's the change I'm going to create. And then they can't find jobs because most of them are from areas of extreme poverty where there's an 80% youth unemployment rate. And secondarily, any jobs that do exist go to the boys. And then lastly, but not the least importantly, they lose all this like social support that they've had over the last several years of being with other really high achieving young women. And they face a ton of pressure, through the form of dowry and bride price to get married, to start having kids, to not continue their education. And so this was kind of the moment in the story where I'm like, come on, 30 of the brightest women in the country aren't going to go on to university because of this like 9-month gap. Surely there's something we can do, right? So famous last words. This can't be that hard. Like, surely we can figure something out.
Right.
So I started a nonprofit for just a tiny blip. And it was only a tiny blip because the further I started researching and asking questions and really trying to understand what the root issues were, the more convinced I became, like, okay, we actually need to be thinking about this in a way that's like sustainable and scalable and contributing to the local economy. We need to do something where we keep the girls living together, ideally earning a skill, learning a skill. And so I scrapped the charity thing. I started a chicken farm. Chicken farm failed pretty miserably, mainly because I realized chickens are gross and like I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And so then I made a pair of these like strappy, funky sandals. I had actually made a pair of these sandals when I was in college. Zero interest in fashion or design, by the way. It was literally just like, oh, I'd love a pair of flip-flops that don't flop. And so like took some, rubber soles and tore the thong off and replaced it with some ribbon. And I had flip-flops that didn't flop. And it was funny because at the time, people would stop me and ask me about them and be like, oh, those are funky, cool. Like, where'd you get those? And I was like, haha, like I made them in my dorm room, and people actually asked me to make them back in college. Like, oh, will you make me a pair? I'm like, no, you can make your own sandals. And then now I'm, like spending my entire life being like, but no, buy my sandals. www.ssekodesigns.com. So I make these sandals and I prototype them out. I kind of cobble together a very rudimentary supply chain of like local suppliers. And then I go out to the school and I ask the school, like, hey, who are 3 women who are really like high potential, have amazing leadership capacity, but probably just based on where they come from, will have the hardest time actually going to university. And the school chose 3 young women, Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca. And so I sat down with Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca. I taught them how to make these sandals, and I basically made them a promise that changed the entire trajectory of my life. I was like, listen, if you make these sandals for the next 9 months, I promise that you will go to university next fall. And they were like, okay. And I was like, okay. And then I packed up probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 suitcases full of sandals that I probably illegally didn't claim going through customs would be my guess, and came back home to the US and started selling them out of the back of my car, which is definitely what your parents want you doing with your master's degree in journalism.
Yeah, everybody should do that, right?
And that's kind of how it started.
What was the first break that you had, retail break? Was there a store or someone that actually took a chance on it?
So I would say our first break was honestly probably more from a publicity standpoint. We had a handful of stores probably at the time, all local, independently owned boutiques, and we're doing majority of our business online. And we, in that first year, got featured. So we had a blogger who had written about Sseko earlier in the year. That was our like first big hit, a mommy blogger. And then she went on.
That's amazing. Yeah, I had a mommy blogger story too that just changed the trajectory of my company too. But go ahead.
Really amazing. Yeah, and that wasn't. So this was probably in like 2009, 10-ish.
Yep.
So like I was kind of the height of their. I would say like the influence. It was enormous. And so
mine was Pioneer Mom in Chicago.
No way. Okay. So we had Pioneer Mom or Pioneer Woman?
Pioneer Woman, yes. Pioneer Woman.
Okay. So we had a Pioneer Woman post about us about like a year later. And that was also amazing. And it was just like a little tiny like mention. Yeah. It wasn't even a full thing. But this one, her name is Design Mom, Gabrielle Blair. And so she posted about us, and then she went on actually later that year. She got chosen to curate Martha Stewart's gift guide for the year, holiday gift guide. And so she put our sandals in the gift guide. So funny story about this. We have no idea that was coming. No idea we hadn't gotten chosen for it. So probably like a week, maybe a week or a few days before we got featured in Martha Stewart's holiday gift guide, I'm like, okay, holidays are coming up. We should probably do some sort of like promotion. I like built our website. We had no e-com capabilities. Everything was manual. So I think we're going to do like a buy 2 straps and get 1 free, right? Because you buy the base of the sandal and then you can change out the straps. And so I was like, all right, in Photoshop. I did all of our graphics and web design for years and years and years, made a little slider with our promo, whatever. A couple days go by, and then all of a sudden our website just gets slammed, right? We've got like all of this traffic. We start selling out of things. And of course, my first thought is like, man, I really got a knack for this marketing thing, Came up with this brilliant promo, did a buy two, get one free, and now we're like selling out of our inventory. And then I decided to like check on our Google Analytics and saw that all of the traffic was coming from marthastewart.com. And then honestly, that's when we realized like, oh, hey, this whole model at the time, literally our employees only worked for like 9 months. So this was in like November. We had said so long to our graduates. So we only had women in between high school and university. And we're like, it's fine because we sell sandals. So we'll just produce 9 months out of the year and we won't sell any in the winter. Okay, well, it turns out that had us rethinking our production a little bit. But it was also like, did it change the course of our business forever? Probably not. But like it did feel kind of like this stamp of legitimacy that it's like, oh, people are buying this. And it's not just like my mom and her friends who feel bad for their nearly homeless like friend's daughter. Like it's because people love the product and they're so excited to be a part of this story. And at that point, my then husband and I, not then, he's still my husband, but we had just gotten married. We're like, oh my gosh, like this is going to work. People love the product. We got Mary, Mercy, and Rebecca into university. Like, let's do it again next year and try to hire twice as many women.
That's phenomenal. And that program's still working like that today?
So yes, we partner with the same school, literally. So my goal 10 years ago was like the biggest dream that I could have possibly ever imagined that felt so huge and scary was like, my dream is that someday every single girl that goes to this high school, when she graduates from high school, if she needs it and she wants it, she has a built-in job opportunity to bridge that 9-month gap. She'll start working at Sseko. She'll earn enough money so that hands down, no questions asked, she has the money to continue on to university. And today I'm super excited to say we've done that. We've grown to a point where every single year, every single girl that graduates from that program that says, yep, I need and want that job, which is typically all of them. You might have one or two that have another opportunity. Basically, they graduate from high school and a few days later, they move into the city. They start their first job at Sseko. They work for 9 months. And during that 9-month period, 50% of their salary goes into an educational savings fund that they're not allowed to access until they continue on to college. And at that point, we release that savings and then we match what is in that savings fund with a 300% scholarship towards university. They graduate from Sseko, they go on to college, they get degrees in law and medicine and education and public policy and are out in the world doing just absolutely phenomenal things. I just caught up with one of our graduates, Beatrice, who was probably in our 3rd class, and she studied economics. She is from northern Uganda, grew up in the height of the civil conflict there. All of her brothers were captured by the Lord's Resistance Army. So just like a crazy, crazy childhood filled with a lot of war and trauma. Well, she went to school, studied economics, has continued on. She now is the chief loan officer for the entire region for a microloan organization and has personally overseen the deployment of over 1,000 loans to women in her community and is walking alongside of them, teaching them, mentoring them how to start and run and grow their own small businesses. I mean, just like unbelievable things that it's like in the grand scheme of things, we're playing like this small role in this like beautiful story of kind of helping launch these women into the roles that they were created to be in.
Well, and that's gonna help the country immensely. I mean, hands down, right? I mean, you're giving a chance for the best and brightest to go to school and make a difference and not be stuck in the village. And I think that's amazing. We got to talk about the book. So I could talk about Uganda all day. What inspired you to write Beginner's Pluck, and what does that title mean?
Yeah, there's like 16 reasons why I wrote the book, which is probably how you know it's time to write a book when you're like, we got to write this book. So Beginner's Pluck is obviously kind of a play on words, and it references a few different things. The first part being like beginner's luck. I noticed, so there was a time in our business, so as I mentioned, we started out kind of as an e-com business, and then we grew into a traditional like wholesale company. So we're probably about 5 years in to running this company. We're selling products to stores, and then they go on and they're selling the product to the end consumer. And we're feeling real good about the impact that we're making in East Africa. And we kind of start asking this question of like, okay, we're doing all this really cool stuff on the manufacturing side. And then here on the US side, we're kind of running like a, par for the course, like retail brand. We started thinking about like, is there a way that we could infuse our business model here in the US with our core mission of creating community and opportunity for women? And one of the really interesting problems that started to emerge, I talk about in the book about how we love to go out and look for solutions, especially as entrepreneurs, as leaders. But the real goal isn't being someone who can actually hear and listen and lean into really interesting problems. And if you can be that person that hears that and responds to that, I really believe that you're on a course to create something really meaningful. And the really interesting problem that I started hearing about here in the US was from my customers. And it was I do a lot of like public speaking. It was every time I would go speak, whether that was at a women's conference, whether that was at a business conference, whether that was to a class of college kids, was this like grappling with purpose and impact. People saying like, how did you do that? I want to do something that matters. I want to make an impact in my life. You're so passionate. How did you find your passion? So this was a question that like started to emerge, people asking me. And so at the same time, we were like thinking about, well, man, is there a way that we could solve this really interesting problem with our business model? What if instead of selling through stores and being one of 300 brands that this store is selling, like, well, what if we put our product and our brand and our impact into the hands of women out in their communities who want to build lives of purpose and passion and impact? What would happen and what could we do? Well, around that time, so we're thinking about this like huge business model shift, and I start getting really anxious. And I notice as a leader, I'm starting to act out of a lot of fear. And my fear kind of came down to, okay, if we do this, if we take this huge leap, at this point, about 75% of our revenue was coming through our wholesale channel. So to cut that revenue stream off was like no small thing, right?
No.
So there was this part of me that was like, okay, if we do this and it fails, everyone around me is going to look at me and they're going to go, see, it was just beginner's luck. And it was going to disvalidate everything that I had done up until the point. That was my like imposter syndrome, insecurity message that was getting louder and louder in my head. And so instead of like being ruled by that fear, I really started leaning into it. I'm like, where is this coming from? And try to think about a time in your career where you did something really big and scary and you didn't have that like message speaking to you. And I kind of had to go all the way back to the beginning of my career. And through that process, I started realizing, oh my gosh, there was so much that I did naturally during the earliest days of my career when I truly was a beginner, when the stakes were like, frankly, pretty low, that now that I'm 5 years into my career and I've got employees and I've got a burn rate and I've got investors and I've got health insurance and premiums that I'm promising people, I have stopped doing all of those things. And so I really went through this intellectual exercise of trying to understand what were the mentalities and mindsets that I had when I was actually a beginner. And could I, now that I'm no longer a beginner, actually just get really intentional about channeling my inner beginner to help me be a more creative and hopefully innovative leader and business person for the long run. And so that's kind of where the concept of beginner's pluck came in. So pluck as a noun, for those of you that don't know, it means spirited and determined courage. And the other thing that I started noticing in our community, so, okay, spoiler alert, we made the shift. We're a direct sales company now. In the first full year of making the shift, we ended up doing more revenue through like a few dozen women in their community than we were doing through 500 stores across the United States of America. And we're talking about, like a homeschooling mom of two, a pharmacist from like small town Indiana, just like crazy stuff. And these women are selling sandals and they're sharing the story and they are like all in on this mission. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is who we were created to be. So one of the things that ended up happening is, so we started having women in our community be really successful, right? They're selling, they're building teams. So I'm inviting them on these monthly webcasts. And I'm like, hey, share with the rest of the women in our community how you had this amazing month. Like you sold $20,000 in product. How did you do it? And by the way, you also have a full-time job. Like, tell us about that. So we have these women that are just like kicking butt. And I invite them onto these webcasts to share, tell us your secrets. And so often they will start out by saying something like this. Well, I think honestly, I honestly think I just got lucky. And I'm like, bull crap, you got lucky. Like, I'm seeing behind the scenes what you're doing. Right. Like, I see the mentalities and the mindset. I see the risks that you're taking. I see the way that you're following up. I see the way that, frankly, you're just doing pretty simple things, but you're doing them over and over again, and you're committed to that. And you make time, and you make an hour a day to just do the things that you said you were going to do. And that is like what's resulting ultimately in your success. And through that, I've learned specifically for women. So women are a lot more likely to attribute their success to external factors, right?
Right.
I got lucky. I was in the right time, right place. Mentor, the whole deal. Whereas men are much more likely to attribute their success to internal factors, meaning I'm successful because I'm awesome, because I did these things, And so kind of in our community, it became a little bit of a rallying cry of like this phrase of who needs luck when you've got pluck. And I actually, frankly, started banning the word luck on our calls. If someone said that they got lucky or that they were hoping to get lucky, I would literally obnoxiously be like, we don't use that word here, because you don't need luck when you've got pluck. And that's kind of how the concept of beginner's pluck emerged.
I love it. You've got an interesting take on sort of dreams and passion. And, there's a lot of nonsense out there. Maybe I'm going to get a little flack for saying that, but
you and me both, Rhett.
It bothers me immensely when people say, follow your dreams and follow your passion. Number one, I don't know what that means. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, really, what does that mean? And you've got an interesting take on it. And I think you've said, well, I hate to break it to you, but you're not likely, I hate to break it to you, but you're likely never going to find your passion. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that your passion is not fully formed as this singular entity that is out there waiting to be discovered by you. When we believe that, we actually kind of subconsciously start to believe in this narrative of luck, right? Like, I got to open the right door at the right time. I hear these stories about the person that, happens to be in the elevator at the right time and get their lucky break by this, one magical conversation that leads them down this path where they, not only found their passion, but became millionaires really quickly, whatever it is. So it kind of puts us in this passive state of well, if only I could do that, if only luck would strike, if only God would give me my purpose and speak that to me in a dream. And it removes us from this state of proactive action.
Responsibility.
Responsibility, right? And it puts it into this kind of elusive, mysterious, only the lucky people discover it. And I noticed that when people would ask me that, being someone who's kind of on the other side of, I would very much so say, I am living a life where I am deeply passionate, and I wake up nearly every day feeling like, oh yeah, I'm doing something that's creating an impact, and I love this purpose that I'm participating in. And the way people will ask me about that has this wistful, magical, how did it happen for you? And so the language that I talk about in the book, the spoiler alert, is that you're never going to find your passion, but you can build it. And the moment we shift from this language of finding, which is kind of passive and lucky, and you might discover it, you might not, to nope, it's a thing that literally every single person can do. But building requires a state of proactivity and of responsibility, right? So no one is well, I hope someday to build my dream house, and just assumes that they might have a conversation, make one right move, and then all of a sudden they are oh, look, it's here. No, when you think about building something, you're oh, okay, I start out with the blueprints, and I might need to hire an architect, or maybe I'll DIY that. And then you think about laying the foundation and how much that's going to cost and when you're going to break ground. And like, it automatically puts you into a state of like, of course, this is going to be something that has to evolve and build like over time. And oh yeah, by the way, of course, that's also going to involve a lot of hard work and a lot of missteps and evolutions and iterations. Like, it's not a single entity. And so a lot of what Beginner's Pluck is about is like, hey, here are the 14 principles that I've learned over the last 10 years, the things that, one, I think modern culture is like leading us astray in. So a lot of the book is like, hey, like some guru on Instagram is telling you to go do this. That's a bunch of bull crap. Like, here's actually like the truth of the matter. But here are the actual principles and tools and mentalities and mindsets that you can use, that if you cultivate these and you're really intentional, I all but promise you, you will go on and build an extraordinary life with purpose and passion and impact.
What are some of those principles?
So, well, one of the principles, and one of my favorites that I start the book out with, is that you need to own your average. And this is really kind of flying in the face of basically all of the self-help talk over the last 15 years. That's like telling us that we're so much like smarter and better and more special and awesome than we think we are. And that the work that we need to do in ourselves is to just believe that about ourselves. Believe that we're above average so that you can go out and then do above average things. Well, Rhett, I'm a real practical person, okay? I'm very logical. And when I hear somebody telling an arena full of 10,000 people that they're all above average, my little like BS radar starts to go off a little bit. And I'm like, okay, the nature of averages is that 80% of people in this arena are actually somewhere in the middle of the bell curve. And by you telling them that they need to believe that they're above average to then go out and to do something above average, one, it's not literally mathematically like possible. Two, it actually does the exact opposite of what we think and want it to do. What it does is it convinces people, it reinforces this narrative that in order to do something really special, in order to build something extraordinary, you need to be extraordinary. And then you need to believe that about yourself. Well, the truth of the matter is that you don't. The truth of the matter is that so much of the amazing, extraordinary things that exist in the world were built by people who were actually pretty average. Average when it comes to skill set and intellect and talent. And what the social science shows us is that people that actually just own that say like, yeah, I'm kind of like somewhere in the middle of the bell curve. What that actually does is that reinforces a narrative of what we would call growth mindset, right? Where like, I believe that in order to be successful, I've got to go out and I've got to try, and I've probably got to fail like 7 or 8 times before I do it. If you believe that you need to be special in order to go out and do something special, what you start to do is you start to act out of fear, and your imposter syndrome starts to really like drive all of your decisions. You stop saying yes to stuff that you can't envision yourself being immediately successful in, because you've got to protect yourself and your ego of being this like smart, successful, everything that she touches turns to gold type of person. And over time, we see it so much, even with children. There's really interesting studies about what happens when you take a group of kids and you give them a test and you praise one group of kids for being smart. You just say like, oh my gosh, you're so smart and you're so special. Well done. You take another group of kids who scored the same and you say like, hey, you did really good. It's probably because you're like really curious and you probably worked really hard on that and didn't give up even when you were frustrated. Those two groups of kids, when they go on to take the next test, the kids in that first group that were praised for being smart and special, they actually choose the less challenging assignment. The kids in the group that were praised for their work ethic and for just like persistence, they actually raise their hand and say, yeah, give me the more challenging one. Like that was fun and interesting, and I want to lean into that. And then the crazy thing is that the kids in group 2 that asked for the more challenging assignment, not only did they take on the bigger challenge, they actually perform better in the next test. So we see all the way from like when we're little tiny tots, this message of like, you're so special, you're so smart, you're so unique, like you just need to believe that and then go out and do something extraordinary, is actually having the opposite effect. So instead, I suggest that we all come together We proudly own our average and just say like, hey, you're probably somewhere in the middle of the bell curve, but here are mindsets and mentalities and principles that you can do. And if you just are committed to them and do them over and over and over again, you're going to do something extraordinary.
I think it sets you up to, and when you go to those things, it sets you up for this expectation and this entitlement too, right? And you think at some point that you're owed that success, and you got to realize, you're not going to get it without the hard work. You're not going to get it, and you may not get it anyway, even if you work hard. But it's I think it sets you up for failure and disappointment. I really do.
And what I found too is that when it comes to success, like a lot of people think they know what they want. And then a lot of people, like the story of people achieving success in business, financially, and getting to a point where they're like, yeah, but does it matter? Like, what am I actually doing? And I really do believe that if you're like, Beginner's Pluck is probably not the book to read if your vision of success is like become a millionaire in the next 90 days. Yeah. But if part of your like metric and definition of success is like, I want to wake up every day, I want to believe that the work that I'm doing matters, I want to make a positive impact in the world. I want to do that, by the way, in a way that's like sustainable, which means I need to have a level of success. I need to make money. I need to build a company. I need to be an awesome employee, whatever that is. And if that's your definition of success, then I really do believe it is available to literally every single one of us. And so my hope is kind of using this book as a way to demystify some of those principles so that they feel more actionable and accessible to everybody.
What do you mean by, you said something earlier and I was going to ask you anyway, I'd written it down in my notes. How do you get in touch or embrace your inner beginner?
Yeah. So there are 4 stages of learning. You've probably heard of the 4 stages of learning at some point. Mm-hmm. So we all start out in this zone of unconscious incompetence. So that's where we're like, okay, you don't know what you don't know. It's kind of happy-go-lucky. I've got a 3.5-year-old son. He's like living his best life in unconscious incompetence. Okay. So then you have like this moment of awareness.
A 15-year-old is doing the same, so it's all good.
You have a moment of awareness. You get the dream job. You get into the school. You get the promotion. You kind of have this moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in over my head. There's a gap between what I need to do and what I know how to do, and you become consciously incompetent, right? You are aware of how incompetent you are. And this, of all 4 stages of learning, this is our most difficult, most dreaded stage, because it's where our egos are super fragile and all of our insecurities kind of rage, right? So then you keep practicing and you get better and you build your competence and you emerge into the state of conscious competence. So that's when you're like, okay, I'm like doing this. It still takes a lot of effort, but I can do it. And then you keep going and eventually you emerge into the state of mastery or expertise, which is where you're like, I'm so good at this, I could literally do it in my sleep. Well, when we believe in the stages of learning as like a stair step, right, it subconsciously sets up this idea that we should just constantly be progressing up until the state of like mastery or expertise. And that's like the end goal. That's the end all be all goal for leaders, for, CEOs, for entrepreneurs, for nonprofit leaders, whatever it is.
Right.
So what ends up happening when we believe that is when we feel the feelings that we felt down there in stage 2, right? Of like imposter syndrome, fear, I'm in over my head. We naturally feel like, oh my gosh, we regressed. Like we fell back down, and it only perpetuates this sense of like a super fragile ego. We start to act more out of fear. We start clamping down, taking less risks. What I really propose, and the way that we can really channel and harness our inner beginner, is by understanding that those 4 stages of learning are not a stair step to the top. They're not a pyramid. They're actually a cycle, right? And the goal for innovative, courageous, evolving leaders is actually to be constantly moving through the stages of learning. And what that does is it really redefines in our head those same feelings of incompetency, insecurity, imposter syndrome, instead of going like, oh my God, I regressed. I fell back down the staircase, or maybe I was stuck down here all along and I just tricked people into believing I, had mastery or expertise in this area. What it does is it rewires our brain to all of a sudden we go from dreading that stage to kind of congratulating ourselves, because what it means is that when we reached mastery or expertise, instead of staying there and kind of like staking our like claim in that real estate, we dove out of that and back into the cycle of learning. We took on a new challenge. We started punching above our weight again. We tried something that felt really high risk. And ultimately, like, those same feelings are actually just a sign of like, oh, you did the thing that like most leaders will never do. When they get to that stage of mastery or expertise, they stay there, and they actually typically tend to stay there to their detriment, right? I heard someone say once this idea that it's like, that's a rabbit trail. That being said, I feel like when we really kind of reframe that, we're able to engage and to embrace our inner beginner. And then a lot of the principles that follow in the book, whether that's own your average, choosing curiosity over criticism, staying really focused on the problem instead of the solution, right? Like, I heard it said once that the train industry in America kind of went out of business because they forgot that they weren't in the industry of building trains. They were in the industry of moving people, right? And so we can get so focused on the solution that we like stop thinking about the original problem that we were like trying to solve. And that's something that beginners do naturally really well, as they're really intrigued and stay really focused on the problem instead of the actual solution. And somewhat ironically, the more focused you are on the problem, the more likely you are to actually build really relevant, robust, and evolving solutions.
Yeah, that's. I think you're spot on there. Do you think what you did was brave?
Which thing?
Well, I number one, initially starting the company and having the courage to go do it, and then making the shifts. I mean, do you consider that as sort of an essential trait for an entrepreneur?
Yes, but I will say, I really distinguish pluck, spirited and determined courage, from fearlessness. I have never in my entire career, I don't think ever felt fearless. I've always felt the fear.
There's something wrong with you if you don't, but
right? I think I say that in the book, but I'm like, by the way, unless you're like a sociopath, you probably are going to like feel these feelings, like right. Whether that's fear, whether that's imposter syndrome, whatever it is. The question is like, do you let that drive you? One of the key things that I have learned how to do is to turn my negative, anxiety-ridden what if, instead of saying, stop imagining things. Stop playing out.
You've got this debate going on in the head, right?
Right. Yes, definitely. What I've done is when I hear myself going, yeah, but what if? What if we fail and this all goes to crap? What if I make the wrong decision and everybody does this? What if I do this and it has this negative implication? When I hear myself starting to go, what if, instead of trying to say like, shut up, stop asking what if, I just try to give a little bit of creative direction to my what ifs and point them in the direction of like, yeah, but what if it works? Like, and then
what if could be a positive.
Totally. And try to give that same, because here's the thing. I meet so many people that are like, I'm not creative. I don't have an imagination. And I'm like, I just heard the like 90-point anxiety-ridden story that you just told yourself about what your boss is going to do or how your kids are going to be messed up for life if you do this one thing. Like, you're fine on the imagination front. You're doing plenty of storytelling. The question is like, can we just give a little bit of creative direction to your story, to your anxiety, fear-ridden stories that you're telling yourself, and instead insert it with a little bit of curiosity and wonder and positivity. And then not all of a sudden, over time, you start to build this muscle of imagination that you're always probably quickly going to ask. You're probably instinct. Your lizard brain is probably always going to first tell you like, yeah, but what if this goes wrong and this goes wrong and this goes wrong? But we can build in ourselves the muscle that starts to go, but what if it works? And what if this catches on? And what if we could make this impact? And then what if that person goes on and they make this impact? And what would that mean for me and my community and my family and the world? And all of a sudden, like, you can kind of be spiraling in this like world of, but what, like, and now all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, we can't not try.
Yeah,
like, I don't want
to. You're ready to go.
Yeah, right. Of like, I don't want to be the person that like was like, what if, and then, but no, and you really, it builds up your propensity to like take a risk and to try and to see, because we're so afraid of failing. But ultimately, like if we allow that to be the main driving force, like we never get to experience the flying.
Yeah, no doubt. What is, two last questions. What was your biggest screw up? And then, but then on the counter to that what was your greatest moment that you remember? And I want to go back to early on, like when did you just sort of like, yes, that was awesome. What do you remember that moment? And then what was your biggest screw up that you remember?
Well, the biggest probably screw up, like if we're talking early days, I love to remind people that like I started 2 other things before I started the thing that was Sseko, right? So it was like I started the charity.
Was there a scary, I'm going to interrupt you, but was there a scary moment where you thought you just ruined the company?
Oh my gosh, yes, like every quarter, basically. We had a moment where we took on a retail deal. It was super exciting, but we had never shipped via container before. We had done all like air freight shipping, and we said yes before we had figured it out, before we were ready. We were like, okay, we'll do a container. That's actually awesome because it's going to make our like cost of shipping per unit go down like dramatically. So we work for probably 4 months to fill up this container. We fill it up. We send it. We literally throw a party in Uganda of just like huge, amazing success. We're so awesome. We worked so hard. We wait. Container's like 30 days late. It's like 60 days late, 90 days late. Orders start canceling. We're out the cash. Like we paid out the cash 9 months earlier because we're vertically integrated. So it's like we're paying for raw materials and electricity 6 months before we're like seeing a PO come through. The container finally lands at our warehouse in the United States. We do celebrate. We're like, okay, we already lost like 30% of our orders, but at least they're here and all the cash that was tied up in that container wasn't gone. We open up the container. Well, it turns out it was really late because it was sitting in a port like in Mombasa. Also turns out that it had a leak in it. So there was all this moisture. So when we open it up, just literally tens of thousands of pairs of sandals that are covered in like fuzzy white mold. I literally hop on a plane to our warehouse the next day. It's like 104 degrees in Missouri, like in this warehouse. And for probably, days, I don't know how long it was. I'm sitting on the warehouse floor, legitimately crying as I take a toothbrush with like bleach water and I'm trying to like salvage as many of these like sandals as I think I can. And I'm like, this is it. Like there's literally no way that we financially recover from this, like just pure financial loss. But the crazy thing is, I feel like something like that happens at least once a year. Like there's all like, and there's this, the moment of just like, this is it. This was the end. Like the ship is.
Yeah, the feeling and like you got kicked in the gut. Yep.
Yeah. But then like, okay, it's been 10 years. We're still here. And it builds up. It really does kind of build up this muscle memory. And I'm not saying that there aren't still days where I'm like, okay, this is really it. Like this is really when the ship sinks. But you start to build up this reservoir of experiences that show like, oh, I felt this feeling before. And yet like we survived. So this feeling doesn't absolutely mean that like the end is coming because we've seen this before.
I remember those moments, but it's really different year 1, year 2, year 3, and you get this maturity, I guess, or this, maybe it's confidence, maybe it's experience, maybe that you can figure it out, and that it's a different feeling when it happens early than when it happens in year 5, and you say, oh, I can fix it. It's going to take some more work, but I can fix it, or I can get around it. I can do something else. I can pivot. I know that feeling, and it's, I remember those feelings very well. Last question: what is the best advice you ever got, and who gave it to you?
Oh my gosh, the best advice that I ever got. I should have a more pat answer to this question, and
I think it changes sometimes from.
It does. So I had a business mentor that told me once, he just looked at me and he said, hey, Liz, you know that Sseko is perfectly designed to get the results that it's getting. You know that, right? And that, like, I don't know if it's advice, but kind of like recognition of responsibility of like, this isn't somebody else's problem. This isn't somebody else. Like, you ultimately have responsibility over this organization, and you have designed a machine that is getting the results that it is getting. Like, that is the nature of an organization. And that to me was a real butt kicker that like really kind of plays around in its head of like, if something's not working, we need to fix it. Like, if something isn't working, we need to redesign, we need to reorganize, we need to rethink how we're thinking. Like, we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again if we're not hitting our goals and think that we're going to. And ultimately, like, that's on me as the leader here. Like, that's on me to think about, how do we make that shift? How do we claim kind of responsibility for that so that we can shift and we continue to iterate and evolve and grow in the right direction?
So 2 things. Where can people get the book?
People can get the book anywhere books are sold. Okay. Amazon, our website, Sseko Designs, Sseko Designs.com, Barnes & Noble, the whole deal.
Now, can people still get involved in the way, sort of at the retail level with you and with Sseko?
Yeah, so you can be a customer. You can just hop on the website, buy product. It's gorgeous. We have an incredible lifestyle brand of footwear and apparel and leather goods. So you can be a customer. You can be a hostess, which is basically you gather your 5 or 10 of your friends either in your living room or online, and we pair you up with a Sseko rep who will come, and she'll tell the story and she'll give you an overview of all the product and help style your friends, and you can purchase that way. Or you can become a Sseko fellow. So those are the representatives that are selling the product. They're sharing the story. They're going to Uganda. They're learning how the products are made. They're kind of joining this global sisterhood of impact. So whether it's through buying, hosting, or selling, we would love for you to be a part of the Sseko story.
Hey, do the people that get involved with Sseko on this side of the Atlantic or the pond, do they get to meet or understand who they're helping? Do they get to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, our top sellers go to Uganda every year. They come to our workshop. They meet the team. We have dinner in their homes throughout the year. Every fellow that joins gets matched with one woman on our team in Uganda. We call them Sseko sisters. You get quarterly updates. You get matched based on your interests, how many kids you have, what your career goals are, all kinds of things. So really what we are trying to do is create a lot of transparency and relationship. So there is, for both parties, this sense of like, hey, when I show up to work every day and I sell this product, here's the impact that it's making. Likewise, for our team in Uganda, hey, when I show up every day and make these products, here's the impact that I'm having on women over in the United States.
That's incredible. Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rhett. This was so much fun. Appreciate you and the work that you're doing. And thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you. And you guys, thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. I know it's 1 o'clock lunchtime or so on the West Coast. On the East Coast, it's getting a little later. And do appreciate your time today. Got a great lineup coming up this week. I've got Joel Solomon, who is chair and partner at Renewal Funds, Canada's largest mission-based venture capital firm. I've got a great lineup. Let's see. I've got Joel Comm coming up. We're going to talk about cryptocurrency. I've got Shaman Durek, who is going to talk to us about meditation. And so it's just got a fantastic lineup coming up this week. Please tune in. You can find the schedule on powerlunch.live. And again, thank you for spending some time with us. We'll